52 seconds. That is how long the silence lasted. 52 seconds of nothing. No words. No defense. No explanation. Just the sound of a man sitting behind a microphone, staring at a document he himself had signed, realizing that every word he had once spoken under oath was now being used as the blade that would cut through every lie he had ever told. Kash Patel sat frozen, his lips parted slightly, as if the beginning of a sentence had formed somewhere deep in his throat but had died before it ever reached the air. His eyes locked onto the paper in front of him. His fingers, which had been confidently drumming on the table just moments earlier, went completely still. And across from him, Richard Blumenthal did not blink. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to, because what he had just done was far more devastating than any shout or any dramatic courtroom gesture. He had simply read Kash Patel's own words back to him. And those words had detonated like a bomb in the middle of that hearing room. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because what happened in that room did not start with a question. It started with a folder. A single manila folder, no thicker than a restaurant menu, that Richard Blumenthal placed on the desk in front of him exactly 4 minutes before the hearing officially began. The cameras were already rolling. The gallery was already full. But nobody was paying attention to that folder. They were watching Kash Patel. He walked in with the kind of confidence that comes from surviving dozens of these hearings before. He shook hands with 2 staffers near the entrance, adjusted his tie, took a sip of water, and sat down with the practiced ease of a man who believed he already knew every question that would be asked. He was wrong. The first 15 minutes were unremarkable. Procedural formalities. Opening statements. The kind of political theater that makes most viewers reach for their remote controls. Kash Patel used this time well. He leaned back slightly. He nodded along to the statements. He scribbled something on a notepad. To anyone watching, he looked calm, prepared, even bored. And then Richard Blumenthal began to speak. His voice was low, measured, almost conversational. He thanked Kash Patel for appearing. He acknowledged the importance of the role. He spoke briefly about the weight of public trust and the sacred obligation that comes with leading a major federal institution. Nothing unusual. Kash Patel nodded politely, the way a man nods when he believes the hard questions are still several minutes away. But then Richard Blumenthal opened the folder. He did not open it dramatically. He simply flipped it open the way a doctor opens a patient's chart. Calmly. Clinically. And he pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a transcript of Kash Patel's own confirmation hearing, held months earlier in that very same building. Richard Blumenthal held it up, not for the cameras, but for Kash Patel. He wanted him to see it, to recognize it, to remember. And then he began to read. Every employee will be held to the absolute same standard. No individual will face termination based on case assignments. This institution will not be used as a political instrument. These decisions will be guided by merit, by integrity, and by the rule of law. I give you my word. Richard Blumenthal paused. He looked directly at Kash Patel. Those were your words, he said quietly. Under oath. In this building. 7 months ago. Do you remember saying them? Kash Patel shifted in his seat. A small movement. Almost imperceptible. But the camera caught it. His right hand moved from the table to his lap, as if seeking refuge beneath the desk. His jaw tightened in the subtle, involuntary way that a human body responds when it recognizes danger. He cleared his throat, leaned toward the microphone, and said, I stand by the principles I outlined during my confirmation. Richard Blumenthal did not react. He simply reached into the folder and pulled out a second document. This one was a personnel action report. An internal memorandum, dated 11 weeks after Kash Patel had taken office, authorizing the immediate termination of 6 federal employees from a single field office. Richard Blumenthal read the date. The authorization code. The specific language used to justify the terminations, which stated that the individuals had been involved in activities inconsistent with the current leadership priorities of the Bureau. He let those words hang in the air. Activities inconsistent with the current leadership priorities. Then he asked, were these 6 individuals terminated because of their job performance? Kash Patel hesitated. 3 seconds passed. Then 4. Then 5. He reached for his water glass, took a slow sip, and said, "Personnel decisions are made based on a variety of factors, and I am not in a position to discuss individual cases in this setting." Richard Blumenthal nodded. Not in agreement. In anticipation. Because he had expected exactly that answer. He reached into the folder again. A third document emerged. Thicker this time. A compilation of dates, timelines, cross-reference reports, and internal communications obtained through oversight requests. Richard Blumenthal laid it flat and began walking Kash Patel through it, the way a prosecutor walks a jury through a crime scene. He started with a date in late October. On this date, he said, a media report revealed that a government aircraft assigned to your office had been used for what appeared to be a personal trip. Flight records showed the aircraft traveling to a location where a private event was being held. Kash Patel's breathing became slightly shallower. Richard Blumenthal continued. The following day, you authorized the termination of a senior official who had served the Bureau for nearly 3 decades. This individual oversaw the unit responsible for managing the very aircraft fleet referenced in that report. Richard Blumenthal paused. Coincidence? Kash Patel opened his mouth. Then closed it. Then opened it again. I do not make personnel decisions based on media coverage, he said. His voice was steady but quieter than before. Richard Blumenthal moved to January. A major newspaper published an extensive investigation featuring interviews with current and former employees describing a pattern of leadership failures. Low morale. Confusion in the chain of command. A growing fear among career professionals that their jobs depended not on competence but on perceived political loyalty. That same day, a former senior legal official testified before a separate committee that he had possessed substantial evidence in an ongoing investigation and was confident in the strength of that case. The following morning, 6 more agents were fired from a field office, along with several senior officials at headquarters. Richard Blumenthal let the timeline speak for itself. He did not editorialize. He simply laid each event beside the next, the way a mason lays bricks, building a wall that Kash Patel could not climb over. And with each new date, each new correlation between a bad headline and a round of firings, the temperature in that room dropped by another degree. The gallery went completely silent. Reporters stopped writing. Everyone was watching. Then came February. And February was where the timeline became a crisis. Richard Blumenthal described footage showing Kash Patel at an international sporting event, celebrating in a locker room with athletes, drinking, laughing, posing for photographs. The footage went viral. It raised immediate questions about the use of government resources. The estimated cost to taxpayers was cited in multiple reports. Within 48 hours, Kash Patel authorized another round of terminations. But this time, the individuals who were fired were members of a specialized counterintelligence unit. An elite squad whose expertise was focused on monitoring threats from a specific foreign adversary. A foreign adversary that, just days later, would become the target of a major military operation. Richard Blumenthal stopped. He put down the document. He folded his hands. And he asked the question that would trigger the 52 seconds that will define this hearing for years to come. You swore under oath that no employee would be terminated based on case assignments. You swore this institution would not be used as a political instrument. I have shown you a documented pattern in which every major round of terminations came within 24 to 48 hours of negative press coverage about your personal conduct. I have shown you that the most recent firings eliminated agents with specialized expertise in threats from the very nation we were about to go to war with. So I am going to ask you directly, and I want you to think carefully because you are under oath right now, just as you were 7 months ago. Did you fire these people to protect this country, or did you fire them to protect yourself? The room stopped. The ambient noise of shuffling papers and whispered conversations vanished as if someone had pressed a mute button on reality itself. Kash Patel stared at Richard Blumenthal. His mouth was closed. His hands were flat on the table, palms down, as if trying to physically hold himself in place. His breaths were shallow. Controlled. The kind of breathing a person does when trying very hard not to let their body betray what their mind is feeling. 10 seconds passed. The camera zoomed in slowly on Kash Patel's face. His eyes moved downward toward the transcript. Toward his own words, printed in black ink on white paper, sitting like a confession he had already signed. 15 seconds. A staffer behind Kash Patel leaned forward as if to pass a note, then stopped. No lifeline was thrown. 20 seconds. Richard Blumenthal did not repeat the question. He did not prompt. He simply sat there, hands folded, waiting with the patience of a man who understood that silence was louder than any answer could ever be. 30 seconds. Somewhere in the gallery, someone coughed. The sound was almost violent in the stillness, like a gunshot in a cathedral. Kash Patel blinked. His Adam's apple moved as he swallowed hard. His right hand lifted toward the microphone, then retreated to his lap. 35 seconds. 40 seconds. Richard Blumenthal still had not moved. Had not broken eye contact. Had not offered a way out. 45 seconds. Kash Patel's lips moved almost imperceptibly, as if rehearsing something internally, testing words before deciding whether to release them. But no sound came. 50 seconds. 51. 52. And then he spoke. His voice was hoarse. Thin. As if the silence had cost him something physical. He said, "I have always acted in the best interest of this institution and the American people." Richard Blumenthal stared at him for 3 more seconds. 3 seconds of a man weighing whether to push further or let the silence speak louder than any follow-up could. He chose the latter. But the hearing was not over. The folder still had documents. The next one was a timeline not of firings but of lawsuits. 3 separate legal actions filed by former employees, all making the same core allegation, that their terminations were unconstitutional. That they had been fired not for incompetence or misconduct but for their perceived political beliefs. That they had been assigned to investigations by their superiors, had followed every protocol to the letter, and had been punished not for what they did wrong but for what they did at all. The filings described public statements by Kash Patel characterizing fired employees as corrupt actors engaged in weaponized law enforcement. The plaintiffs argued these statements were defamatory, made without any internal investigation, any hearing, or any opportunity to respond. Richard Blumenthal read key phrases from the filings. The constitutional amendments alleged to have been violated. The right to free expression. The right to due process. Then he asked, did any of these individuals receive a formal hearing before they were terminated? Kash Patel's answer was brief. Personnel decisions are handled through appropriate channels. Richard Blumenthal pressed. That is not what I asked. Did they receive a formal hearing? Yes or no? A 4-second pause. Then, I am not at liberty to discuss the specifics of individual personnel actions. Richard Blumenthal leaned back. He did not need to say what everyone was already thinking. The answer was no. The hearing continued for another 2 hours. Other members asked their own questions. Some supportive. Some critical. But none of it mattered. The hearing had been decided in those 52 seconds. In the moment when a man who had promised under oath that no one would be punished for doing their job was confronted with irrefutable evidence that he had done exactly that, and he had no answer. Not a bad answer. Not an evasive answer. No answer at all. And here is what makes this moment larger than one man in one hearing room. This is not a story about a single director or a single senator. It is a story about what happens when institutions meant to protect the public become instruments of personal survival. When the shield becomes a sword. When the people charged with investigating threats to the nation become threats themselves, not because of what they did, but because of who they investigated. Every democracy rests on a single fragile agreement, that the people who hold power will be held to the same rules as everyone else. That no position is a fortress from which a person can wage war against the truth without consequence. That agreement is not enforced by laws alone. Laws are words on paper. They are only as strong as the people willing to enforce them and the institutions willing to uphold them. When those institutions are hollowed out, when experienced professionals are replaced with loyal subordinates, When keeping your job depends not on competence but on compliance, the agreement cracks. And once it cracks, it does not heal on its own. What you witnessed was a crack. 52 seconds wide. And the question is not whether Kash Patel will survive it. Directors come and go. The question is whether the institution will survive what he has done to it. Whether the men and women who built networks of informants over decades, who tracked operatives and disrupted plots and worked in silence so the rest of us could live in safety, whether their work can be rebuilt after being deliberately dismantled. Richard Blumenthal knew this. That is why he did not shout. That is why he let the silence do the work. Because the most powerful testimony in that room was not spoken by either man. It was spoken by the absence of words. By the gap between a promise and a reality. 52 seconds is less than a minute. It is the length of a television commercial. But under oath, with cameras rolling and a nation watching, 52 seconds of silence is an eternity. It is a confession without words. It is the sound of a man who has run out of lies discovering that the truth was waiting for him all along. Patient. Quiet. And absolutely merciless. The hearing ended. The cameras turned off. Kash Patel stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out without speaking to the press. But the transcript remains. His words from 7 months ago remain. And the 52 seconds of silence remain, preserved in the public record, a permanent monument to the moment when the distance between a promise and a betrayal was measured not in words but in the quietest, longest, most devastating 52 seconds that hearing room has ever known. And now the question that Richard Blumenthal asked is yours. Because in a democracy, every citizen is a juror. The evidence has been presented. The silence has been heard. The verdict belongs to you.